in the small, rain-soaked city of Larkview. A tiny girl named Emily Ward, barely 8 years old, clutched a wrinkled $5 bill as she hurried down the street, her shoes soaked through and her hair sticking to her cheeks. But she didn't care because today was her mother's birthday. And even though they barely had enough money for food, she had promised herself she would bring home a cake, even the smallest one, to make her mother smile. Again, after months of working double shifts and coming home, exhausted with trembling hands, Emily pushed open the door of Baker's Heaven. The warm scent of vanilla and sugar, nearly making her cry, because she remembered how her mom used to bake cakes before life became cruel. But when the lady at the counter told her the cheapest cake was $10, Emily's heart sank still. She bravely set her $5 on the counter and whispered that she could maybe buy a slice instead. Something small, but with a candle she could light for her mom. The customers around her turned to look, some with pity, some with indifference, and Emily lowered her eyes to hide the tears forming. But before she could pick up the money and leave, the door chimed again, and a tall, sharply dressed man walked in, a lonely, tired-eyed CEO named Alexander Kane, a man who had everything except family, warmth, or someone who remembered his birthday anymore. He heard the small, trembling voice begging for just something sweet for Mommy, and he froze because it reminded him of the days when he was a child and his own mother tried to stretch every dollar after his father abandoned them, and something inside him cracked. The baker shook her head apologetically at Emily, who picked up her money with shaking fingers, whispered thank you, and turned to leave. But Alexander stepped forward and gently stopped her, kneeling to her height and asking in a soft voice why she was crying. Emily told him everything, from her mother's illness to her struggles at work to how all she wanted was a cake to make her mother feel special. And Alexander felt his throat tighten as memories he buried long ago resurfaced. Without hesitation, he stood up, looked at the baker, and said, "Give her the biggest cake you have," shocking everyone. But Emily shook her head fiercely and said she didn't want charity. Only something she could pay for because her mom taught her to stand tall. Alexander smiled softly and told her that in the world, sometimes kindness travels in circles and maybe one day she would pass it on. But Emily still hesitated until he made her a deal she could pay her $5, and he would cover the tax, and only then did she agree, her face lighting up with the purest smile he had seen in years. The baker boxed the cake carefully, adding extra decorations and candles for free. And when Emily hugged the box like treasure, Alexander felt something. Warmth spread through his chest for the first time in decades. As she turned to leave, she suddenly rushed back and hugged Alexander's leg tightly, whispering, "Thank you, sir," before running outside and disappearing into the bustling street, unaware that this moment had just changed both their lives more than they could imagine. Emily ran home through the rain with the cake carefully shielded in her arms, her heart glowing with joy as she imagined her mother's reaction. And when she burst into their tiny apartment, her mother, pale, tired, but still beautiful, looked up in shock, asking how she managed to afford something so wonderful. Emily told her the entire story, leaving out nothing, and her mother's eyes filled with tears because in a world full of struggle, someone had shown kindness to her daughter, which meant more than anything money could buy. Meanwhile, Alexander returned to his high-rise office, but he couldn't shake the image of Emily's brave little face, the way she held on to her dignity despite her hardship. And he found himself staring out the window thinking about all the birthdays he had spent alone, all the success that suddenly felt empty. The next day, moved by something he couldn't explain, he went back to the same bakery, hoping he might see Emily again. But instead, he overheard two customers talking about a woman in the neighborhood who fainted at work due to exhaustion, the same woman Emily described. And the words hit him like a strike of lightning. Without wasting time, he tracked down the small restaurant where Emily's mother worked, arriving just as an was pulling away with her inside, and Emily crying at the entrance. The moment Emily saw him, she ran to him, burying her face in his coat, and Alexander instinctively wrapped his arms around her, vowing silently that she wouldn't face this alone. He followed the ambulance to the hospital, stayed with Emily while doctors checked on her mother, and even comforted her when she whispered that she didn't want to lose the only parent she had left. Hours later, the doctor emerged, explaining that Emily's mother had collapsed due to overworking and stress, but would recover with proper rest and care. But she would need at least a month off work, something Emily knew they couldn't afford. Alexander didn't hesitate. He offered to cover all medical expenses and even help Emily's mother find a better job once she recovered. But Emily's mother refused, at first out of pride, until Alexander gently told her that accepting help was not weakness, and that her daughter had more strength than most adults he knew. Slowly, she agreed, tears streaming down her face as she held Emily tightly. Over the next weeks, Alexander visited often, bringing food, toys, and sometimes just stories to make Emily laugh. And the more time he spent with them, The more the emptiness he had carried for years began to fade. Soon he helped Emily's mother secure a stable job at his company, not as charity, but because he saw her determination and skills. And little by little, their lives transformed. On the day Emily's mother finally returned home healthy, Emily surprised Alexander with a small handmade card that read, "You gave me a cake that day, but you gave us a family after that." And Alexander, overcome with emotion, hugged her tightly, whispering that she had actually saved him. And so the lonely CEO who once lived in silence, and the brave little girl who once had only $5 formed a bond that turned into family, not by blood, but by kindness, courage, and the belief that even the smallest actions can change someone's world forever.